we'll move swiftly on to the research slot as well, which we have Nikki Gibson, who's first up. Nikki, you there?
Yeah, all good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, nice to hear another Scottish accent as well.
No,
Like,
it's been a few
you're,
today.
yeah, you're a bit easier to understand than Tommy Craig, I'll put it that way.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yes, it is. So I'll stop sharing my screen and then I'll let you share if that's all right.
Perfect.
There you go. So all over to you. You should be able to share from now.
Yeah, have you got it?
Yeah, we've got it, and just there you go. Brilliant. I'll leave it over to you, Nikki. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for listening in. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly around some of my experiences quantifying training load in triathlon. I'll mainly focus on session RPE times duration. We've heard quite a lot about this today already. It's obviously widely used. It's not without its flaws, but it also can be a great starting point for quantifying training load in my experience. When I started in triathlon, the athletes and the coaches were only really starting to formally quantify training load via training peaks. There wasn't necessarily a system in place to do so easily. Not many athletes were wearing heart rate monitors, and if they were, it wasn't consistent, so it might be for the occasional session here or there, but as I say, it wasn't a full-time commitment to wearing heart rate monitors. And they weren't really using power meters either, so that made quantifying the external load quite difficult. I chose session RP by duration because of the points outlined previously, but also because it was no additional work for the coach. So I wasn't asking them to meet me anymore. I wasn't asking them to provide me with any more information. We all know that coaches are really busy people with lots of balls to juggle. So it was more something that I could work on in the background. And if they weren't interested, that was fine. They could just delete my emails. But if they did want to know more, the work was all sitting there behind it. And it was also no new system for the athletes. So all the athletes had Training Peaks accounts already. They were all familiar with it. I wasn't trying to set up a new system, and I wasn't trying to ask them to log into anything new or do anything different. It was really just asking them to rate the sessions on a scale of 1 to 10 in the comments box initially before the RPE feature came into Training Peaks. And after quite a little while of collecting some data, we've now got a functional system where training load is reported. Email is just sent out on a weekly basis to the athlete, the coach, and the MDT. We report on total load and a high intensity load, so anything over an RP of 7. And we also look at sport-specific loads, so we isolate swim, bike, and run load, because realistically, they're probably not getting injured through swim load specifically, but more high intensity run load, and especially high intensity run load when this bike load goes up at the same time. I'm just using Z scores at the moment to quantify the change from week to week. Again, rightly, wrongly, but it's quite straightforward and simple, and it's time effective for us. So it's just a quick example of the training load report that's sent out. The blue bars are the weekly load totals, and then the rolling average is a 4-week rolling average there. And here you see the Z scores that we use as well, with 2 standard deviations being a kind of red rating, whereas one's an amber, and if they're all good, it's in the green zone. We then use that information to individualize training. We can use it in injury prevention and management, and that's mainly to help our physios rule load in or out of injuries. So if an athlete presents with a new injury, they can have a first look at the load report to see if that's something they need to consider or not. And it's also got a role to play in our return to play programming as well. And we can also use it in performance planning. So for example, we actually individualized the RPE scale for a couple of athletes. So this is where we just paired RP with a battery of lactate and heart rate testing over a period of a couple of weeks, looking at a variety of sessions. And we actually found that, for this example here, that anything aerobic or under LT1 should actually feel like a 2 out of 10 for this athlete, as opposed to the traditional 3 out of 10 in the Seiler model. We use the data to plan in terms of peaking for competition, and we also used it in terms of So here you can see we've looked at sort of a 26-week build into a key race and tried to identify where the highest load might be, and then where we might taper as well. Just go back to this slide here. We also found for about a period of a year where athletes who were engaged in the load tracking were injured or had fewer injuries than those who didn't. But I'll point out that the sample size is very small here, and we could have a whole other conference around what is an injury and what isn't an injury and how do we define that. But this was a kind of quick snapshot that backed up some of our gut feelings on the athletes that were tracking and the athletes that weren't. We also put together this, it's not very high tech, but I was absolutely delighted with my Excel skills in putting this together. So this was just a document for each athlete, which was based on what they usually rated sessions. So the structure was quite similar from week to week. So having collected enough data, we were able to see what athlete X rates the Thursday turbo as, whereas athlete Y rates it as something different. And we could put this together. And this document sat with the coach, and they could select from the drop-down menu whatever sessions they wanted for that week. So that allowed us to sort of say, we think you should probably sit around 7,000 units this week, and you can make that week look however you want. They can double run, or they can double swim, or they can not run at all, or they can do an extra bike session. Total freedom for the coach to design the week however they wanted, but within a guideline that we had set. And that really allowed us to, again, provide some guidelines, but without being too prescriptive or trying to tell the coaches what to do. Because I think, as Wouter pointed out earlier, the relationship between physiologist and coach in a sport like triathlon can be quite close sometimes. Fundamentally, we just use this all as a tool to start the conversation around load. And since then, we really have progressed from when we started just collecting the RPE data. There's now really good buy-in for training peaks, and most athletes are weighing heart rate for every session and collecting power data from every session. So we're now really able to quantify both external load through volume and duration and power output, as well as internal load through heart rate and internal load. And we've got good conversations with coaches and athletes around load and their reflections on load that can actually be really interesting and really useful and help us put bits of the picture together. The next critical bit is how we measure the response to this load, and we tend to do this through a variety of tests, all not without their faults, but the ones that we've selected at the moment. Triathlon is a tricky sport in terms of the race performance often doesn't actually reflect the physiological status of an athlete, so training in doesn't always equal race output. Just through tactics, incidences, race courses, bike crashes, all this sort of thing, it's quite difficult to get an actual, it's not like an 800-meter race where hopefully they can get a true performance out. Well, that's maybe a bit naive for me to say, but you understand the point. So the performance testing that we've looked at is really submaximally looking at LT1 and LT2, first and second threshold, critical power, critical speed in some respects, and time trial performances, which can relate into both of those, but also looking at training data and pulling out from key repeated sessions, trying to look at progress through them. Some challenges within that, performance testing is not always prioritised by coaches. Performance testing can lack consistency. Sometimes I've read a new paper and I go off on a tangent, and another time a coach might want to do something different, and it pulls us away from where we have been historically collecting the data. And training sessions are infrequently replicated. Although they might look similar on paper, the brief might be changed on the day. So something like might have 12 by 400 might be a really common session that the athletes would do quite frequently. But the session brief, it can be changed. So 1 week it can be 12 by 400 best average, whereas 6 weeks time when the session's repeated, it could be 12 by 400 build 1 to 4. So some of the solutions that I've put in place are to understand why performance testing is not always prioritised. Again, I think Wouter's commented on it earlier that athletes and coaches didn't feel like the training zones or the testing was actually reflective of where they were. So understanding that point and trying to problem solve and find something that does fit what they're looking for, potentially relaxing some of your scientific principles. Pick one thing, but also be creative. If coach wants to look at something, but you want to look at something else, is there a way that you can join them up together, or can you get your data in another way? And I've put coach education, and I don't mean that in a patronising way at all. Again, coaches have an awful lot to juggle. So it's actually more just about, can you just present the data to them and say, you know, we've actually not repeated this session at all this year. And just putting it in front of them and highlighting it might help a little bit. Future kind of questions for me is, again, today there's been a lot of talk about dose response modelling, and we could go down a number of routes with that. But I'm working with a very small sample size, 3 to 4 athletes, maybe 5 best case scenario, and to try and get a complete picture of what this might look like is quite difficult. If those 4 to 5 athletes, if one of them gets injured, all the sorts of things can throw a spanner in the works. So it's more collecting more data and getting the global picture of what the dose response in triathlon looks like. So just to quickly summarise, my advice to anyone starting out here would be to start simple. Session RPE by duration is not complicated, but it did what I wanted to do at the time. And work with the multidisciplinary team and the coaches to find what works best for them. I put that wheel in there because I heard a good saying this week about how you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you just need to make it better or help improve it. And then I still don't think that we quite know what best practice is in triathlon and in terms of quantifying loads. So working together to try and figure that out a little bit. So if there's any smarter people out there than me, which there are a lot of, they can maybe drop me a line and help me answer some of my questions. That's my contact details there, just if anyone needs any more information or wants any more discussions. And that's me. Thanks very much, Steve.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Nikki. Really appreciate that. And it was really insightful into your work and like the research you've done to try and help improve your athlete support. So thank you very much for that.
No problem. Thank you.
We're just short on time, so I'm going to shoot straight over to Darren,
Perfect.
if that's okay.
Yep.
But thank you for your time. Darren,
Cheers.
Can you hear us?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. So, yeah, so if you can just, I'll stop sharing screen now. Can you start to share your screen now, please? And I'll leave you to carry on with the rest of your talk if it works.
Oh, just got over my system preferences, sorry.
No worries. What we can do, so similar to what we did earlier, just bear with me. I'll just basically put up the presentation with your slot on, and if you want to either talk around it if you can't get your system settings sorted, or just let me know either way. Darren, are you there still?
Hello?
Yeah, you got us.
Yeah, got you. Perfect. Hold on one second. I'm going to share the screen now.
No worries. I'll just stop sharing the screen and let you hop on. So you should be able to share it now. There you go. We're on your screen.
Lovely. So, firstly, thanks, Steve, and all the presenters that presented today. It's really been an amazing webinar, and pretty much probably kept us all busy today, as everyone's at home and should be staying at home. So I hope everyone's safe and at home. So I'm pretty much going to cover today, really briefly, some underpinning of athletic development, and then going into sort of 3 research papers that have really helped myself in my current work at Millwall Football Club to try and increase our players' athletic potential. So I just wanted to start really quickly about me. I studied my BSc in Sport and Exercise Science at University of Birmingham, and then straight after that went straight into football at Brentford, where I was there for 6 years, and did a load of different jobs in the academy, from under 9s all the way through up to the under 23s. Just completed my strength and conditioning master at Middlesex University, and currently I am in my 4th year at Millwall Football Club, which is where I am now. So I just wanted to start with this little slogan that children are not mini adults. And as you can see, they may look like adults, but they're not. And they really need to be treated as children, and practitioners and technical coaches sort of always that work in academies and with children always think that performance always should be optimal and always should be consistent. But it's really important to understand that we are working with children, and they are children, and they are due to develop over time, and they're not the finished product just yet. So it's just a really important keynote to have in the back of your head while always doing, part of your sessions and working with those that cohort. So this is an LTAD model, which I just wanted to cover briefly, as most practitioners within the field would have seen this before. But it's just something to know and understand how we take this model and use it with my current work at Millwall Football Club, of how we look at growth rates and maturation statuses, and then how we program physical qualities around that within all the sessions we do. And it's something that we always have in the back of our brains when planning all sessions and blocks that we need to do. So it's just a really good graph which we have to help allow us program our syllabus accordingly. So two key terms off the back of that is your peak height velocity, which is measuring the biggest adolescent's growth, which on average is about 13.5 years old, can last quite a long time, and they do grow and stretch out like Stretch Armstrong. And that happens at different stages, so that's got to be monitored, and we do through all of our anthropometric testing, which we do 3 months, every 3 months. And then following your peak height velocity, you've got a peak weight velocity, so it's the increase in growth, otherwise gaining muscle, and starting to look a little bit like Johnny Bravo. And generally that's about 0.2 to 0.4 years after that biggest growth peak height velocity. So two really important points which we use and we monitor regularly to then help what we do with our athletes at certain times to get those key characteristics which I showed in the previous slide. And the main reason behind it is that you have adolescent athletes grow at different rates. And by monitoring that and assessing that, you might have early maturers, you might have late maturers, as the top graph shows, which occur at different ages, sort of chronological ages. And this can also affect performance, which the bottom graph is showing that just because a late maturer might jump 6-7 centimeters lower than an early maturer, does that necessarily mean that he's a worse performer, or is it just due to the maturation status of that athlete at that time and the biological age? And these are discussions which go on in our multidisciplinary teams when we assess our athletes every year for assess our athletes' performance and development over time. So that was just a bit of the underpinning of the LTADs and what we do. And I just want to use a couple of studies now just to show how we take these studies into practice. So study one is just looking at early specialization versus diversification. And this is a study done in America, in the United States, and it's just looking at the amount of athletes that participate in sport and as they go through the age groups all the way through to professional, how many stay in that specific sport or fall out of the sport and aren't in that sport anymore at profession. So if I just look at soccer, for example, I'm used to calling it football, but we'll call it soccer for now. So at high school, 321,400 athletes started playing soccer and soccer alone. When they got to college, only 5.7% of them continued to play soccer in college. And then you take it a little bit further, and the college athlete, the numbers drop, and then that professional athlete was only 1.9% of the college athletes professional within soccer. But if you take it in the global bigger view of it, from high school, so out that huge number at the start, all the way down to the professional athlete right at the end, which is the whole performance pathway, only 0.08% of those athletes at the start made it into the professional sport. So it's just a really and solely concentrate on that sport from younger, then what we might do is you might miss out on a great athlete in another sport, sort of a hidden gem in another area or another sport. However, there might be some special cases for this. For example, ballet might be a bit different because it's a sport that's very technical and very skill based. So it's something to take into consideration that they might need to specialize early. But the majority of numbers suggest that it's quite tough to make it all the way through to professional. And that's something that we've used at Brentford at Millwall as a study, because we've now incorporated a sort of multi-sport type program to our 9 to 12 program to get them away maybe from playing soccer or football the whole time. And we call it like the Boys to Line program, where we're sort of looking at battle, action, racing, competing, and various different sports in a fun, enjoyable way, to give them different stimuluses. And we might find a player that might not be as good as soccer, but brilliant at, for example, baseball or basketball. So it's something that we've taken and we now are incorporating into our practices regularly, which is a great thing. Moving on to study 2, this is now started to look at plyometric training as a substitute of soccer training, and this is done over sort of an 8-week period, where 13-year-olds and they sort of did a plyometric program twice a week for 20 minutes, but instead of the first 20 minutes being football based, it was plyometric based for half the group, and the other half continue just to do football only. So you're substituting the soccer for plyometrics. And looking at performance.
Darren, sorry to interrupt. Just one minute left, please. That's all right.
Yeah. Looking at performance, you can clearly see that the plyometric group had bigger jumps, faster 10-meter time, and a better agility time. So it's a really key message to take home, that plyometry is really important as part of soccer. Very similar study, but the only difference, what they did was they had it on top of. So the same training group, control, and on top of the soccer. And they found very similar outcomes that the plyometric group that performed twice per week for 20 minutes improved all performance markers, such as 10 meters, agility, but they also incorporated kicking distance as well. So a nice KPI for soccer coaches, where they increase the distance that the athletes can actually kick during that time. And then my last slide, which is the syllabus that we do at Millwall, which is a 3-pillar approach to athletic development. We're looking at building, challenging and moving athletes, building along those physical capabilities through various movements, challenging the athlete in as many ways as possible, and moving in terms of on the field, acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, and linking that with a technical coach in the football drills. So I hope that was insightful for some of the work that we do at our football club and taking the research to practice. So thanks for listening, and my contact details are there if you want to get in touch, anything related to what I presented or any of the research that we use within our club. Brilliant.
Thank you for that, Darren. Cheers, and really insightful stuff. So thank you very much. I'll catch up with you more after this event as well. We'll just we'll go straight on to Liam though. So just to check that, Liam, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. So I'll just stop sharing the screen so you can take over. And all being well. There you go.
Is that all on?
Yeah, that's on. Just need to go full screen with your presentation, if that's okay. Or just play the slideshow, sorry.
I have to do this. Where is it? Slideshow.
Slideshow, yeah.
Play from start.
There you go. Perfect. All yours, Liam.
Brilliant. Cheers, Steve. First of all, I'd like to thank Steve for putting this on. I think I've been doing little bits throughout the day, and it's a little bit like the World Cup, where you come home and there's always football on. So it's been a nice to take your mind off different things and sort of learn stuff off different people from all around the world. Hopefully everyone enjoys this, and I'd be grateful for any feedback off any individuals or anyone who'd like to know more. So this is a study that I did as part of my PhD. It's the energy intake, expenditure and training load of elite professional soccer players. It's also published in the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism. So if anyone wants to read more on the study or see any of the results and discussions, then go ahead there. The reason we wanted to do this study, and it was actually one of the last ones I did of the PhD, was because we wanted to answer the performance questions which are happening in the sport. I think that's been mentioned at numerous points throughout today as well, about performance questions and how that needs to be answered. Because we were giving the players food and prescribing the players different nutrients and things like that, and we actually didn't know what they were expending. So we had no idea of what they were expending, especially during the most difficult weeks, which was when they were playing in that particular season, Thursday, Sunday, or Sunday, Thursday, or Saturday, Wednesday sometimes. And we wanted to really drum home what actually are these guys expending, so how much do we need to feed them? Now, first of all, we had to go through a period of recruiting players, so we put out a presentation to all the first team players, asked them if they'd like to be involved. You obviously get some who were very keen, some not so keen. We managed to get 6 subjects, which we were over the moon with. We actually got a goalkeeper who'd come out of a subsequent case study, and we also got someone else who wanted to be in this study, but he unfortunately got injured in between the time he was recruited and the time the study was about to start. So they did 7-day food diaries, the remote food photographic method, and a 24-hour recall. They also, that was to measure energy intake, and we measured everything through nutritics. They also underwent double labeled water, which is the gold standard for measuring energy expenditure, and you take a double isotope of ingestion of water, and you look at the oxygen, the water and CO2 elimination rates against the water from deuterium that works out the CO2 production. We use GPS and Prozone alongside this data to look at the training load, physical load, because it was training on matches. The training days were on days 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7, and game days are on 2 and 5. All this is everything what was analysed. So we looked at the energy and macronutrient intake, energy expenditure, and the physical loading. What do we find? So this graph takes us on to the physical load. Now you can see there is numbers with different brackets on each side on each of the graph. Now, for example, on day 1 in the blue bar, 5 players undertook that training session, and one of the players was actually on a modified training session because he was coming back from an illness. On the game 2, 4, and then 1 was an unused substitute, and 1 was a substitute. So it just goes to show, when you're doing these applied studies, we don't have control of what we're trying to do. We were very lucky to actually get these numbers in, and it was probably 6 of the first team regulars who we targeted, and we were able to get their data. Also, because of that, we were unable to run any stats on this data because there's too much happening within it and not everyone's got the same data points. So we just presented this data in this. I've used total distance, but we actually presented all training load variables, all different speed zones, things like that. And just to get an understanding, but the total distance, I feel, gives us a big understanding of where the load is during the week. Then we take a look at the macronutrient intake. Look at the graph in the top left, and you can see days 1 to 7 there. And day 2, day 5 in red, they're the games, and the blue bars are the training days. On the red bar, the second on day 2, that is statistically different to days 1 and 3. And then on the red bar on day 5, that's significant to every other day. Then on the end bar, which day 7, which I'll come on to in a very short period, that is different to day 4. Now the reason that being is the players were actually travelling to an overnight, so they were travelling to a away game, and they stayed in the hotel overnight. So they actually had an extra meal, which was provided to them by the club on that day. Now you can see here as well that they undertake some form of carbohydrate periodisation with the higher amounts of carbs on the match days rather than the training days. Whereas protein intake and fat intake is quite similar throughout the week. Maybe a little bit more on the day 5, but nothing really significant. What was interesting of this study as well was the fact that the protein intake was so high. So on average, I think it was 2.6, 2.5 grams per kilo of protein intake, which comparing it to previous research done in footballers, which in England was way back in 1999, which was 0.8 grams per kilo, which is the daily recommended amount. And to increase by that much just shows the appreciation and value now that players actually have for protein. To look at the energy intake expenditure, and I always like this picture of James Milner eating his Yorkshire tea to see, make sure he's getting his energy intake up. The energy expenditure, they actually expended 3,500 calories per day, and they intook nearly 3,200. Now, that was not significantly different, but what would be different is if that was to sustain over a longer period of time. So they might be under consuming, but it might be likely that it was underreported or underestimated by the analyzers of the macronutrient intake. Including summary, the elite level soccer players, they appear capable of matching the energy intake to the energy requirements. They also practice elements of carbohydrate periodisation with the higher intakes on match days than training days. The carbohydrate intake appears to be in accordance with the guidelines. However, we feel that it may be beneficial to increase the carbohydrate intake on the training days while undergoing periods of fixture congestion. This will subsequently increase the muscle glycogen resynthesis and promote loading for the upcoming fixture. Now, where do I see this research going and where I'd like to take this research? I think that we need to actually explore in greater detail whether players actually begin great games with adequate muscle glycogen stores. So we spend a lot of time in making sure they're prepared and they're fresh for games with training periodization in the week, but are we actually making sure that they're fueling appropriately for games and training? Are they able to maximize the adaptations that they're getting from training? Or are they actually able to increase the carbohydrate stores prior to match play so they're appropriately fueled for the game? In particular, in periods of fixture congestion. So when there's 2 games a week and there's only 2 days turnaround in between fixtures, are they able to actually replenish the muscle glycogen stores and able to go again for the next game? Because some of these guys actually do it repeatedly all season, and they either don't get injured and they maintain performance and they're winning games, winning trophies, things like that. So is what they're doing is right, or is what we're prescribing them is right? Additionally, do players adopt any sort of nutritional periodization strategies in the 1 game week? So that's on a Saturday to Saturday fixture and traditional. Are they actually consuming more in the lead into the games than they are earlier on in the week? And throughout the day, is that meal by meal, so more carbohydrates in and around training rather than in the evening or any evening snacks or lunchtime? Now, that just takes me on to a little bit what I'm doing now. So the picture in the background is to sort of, I've managed to take this from working in a Premier League club to Hungary, to League 2, and I'm implementing that with my League 2 players in a different way, and it's a very different way. It's more around education rather than actually giving players food. And that for me just shows how it can be taken to any club as long as the training load is similar. So I've adopted it for the training week. We get Wednesdays off. When at Liverpool, we didn't get Wednesdays off, but that training periodization follows a similar nutritional periodization. And that will wrap it up. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. There's my email and my Twitter handle. Quite happy to answer any questions.
Cheers, Liam. Thank you very much for that. I'll collate all the questions that get asked and post them across to you. Thank you for your time again.
Thank you.
We'll shoot straight across to Joel Jackson. Joel, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So just bear with me. You should be able to share your screen now, Joel, if that's all right, please. If there's any issues, let me know. Happy days up there. Yeah,
Can you see me?
full screen, and it's all you. We can hear you and we can see you.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I'll leave the platform with you, so crack on.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve, for allowing me to be involved with this. What I'm going to be talking about today here is developing an on-ice conditioning plan, periodization strategies for injured athletes and specific individual and team goals. So a bit of a change of pace from the football. So I'm going to be talking about ice hockey here because I am in Canada. So just a quick bit about me. I have a master's in science and exercise physiology, and I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA. The teams that I work with here at the University of Alberta are our men's and women's hockey team, as well as our varsity wrestling and swimming programs. And I'm also part owner of a company here called Competitive Threat Athlete Testing and Development. So the first thing I'll get into right away here is some of the research that I did for my master's thesis. So what I looked at in my master's was time motion analysis and heart rate response to female varsity ice hockey games. And just to quickly run you through the movement categories here, we have standing, forward starting, forward gliding, forward moderate skating, and forward maximum skating. And then the same 4 categories for backward skating. And then the bottom one is struggling for pucker position. So as you can see with this, the majority of the player's time is spent in either forward gliding or forward moderate skating movement categories, looking at difference between defensemen and forwards. Defense are obviously spending more time standing, significantly less time than the forwards in the forward gliding and moderate skating, and then significantly more time in the backwards gliding and backwards moderate skating categories. We also looked at work to rest ratios in 2 different realms. So the shift work to rest ratio was looking at time specifically spent on ice and the time spent in high intensity movement categories compared to low intensity movement categories. And then the game work to rest ratio was time spent on the ice to time spent on the bench. Okay, so when we're looking at on ice, it's like a 1:1.6. Between the actual game of time on the ice and on the bench is 1:3.7. And some heart rate data. So going down the line here, peak shift heart rate. So what their peaks were when they were on the ice. Obviously players hitting very high. Some of them would actually reach a heart rate that was actually higher than what they achieved in a VO2 max test when they were on the ice. And just to give you anybody that's not sure, like a typical shift in ice hockey is going to be anywhere from 30 to 45 seconds, sometimes a little bit longer. So very short periods of time. Average heart rates being very high on ice as well. And then recovery heart rates, this is looking at when their time spent on the bench during the gameplay. So an average staying on the around the lines of 77% of their max was still quite high. And then the intermission recovery, this is looking at recovery heart rates between the first and second periods in the intermission 1, and then the recovery heart rates between the second and third period in intermission 2. So all in all, it's just pointing to the fact that hockey is a very aerobically demanding game, where often it gets presumed that it's strictly anaerobic in nature. So it's obvious that hockey involves repeated sprinting and repeated sprintability. So when we're looking at repeated sprint exercise, they're defined as short duration sprints equal to or less than 10 seconds, separated by brief recovery periods of equal to or less than 60 seconds. So factors that are going to be contributing to the decrement of repeated sprint performance are going to include limitations in energy supply. So we're looking at how phosphocreatine, anaerobic glycolysis, and oxidative metabolism are going to share the load. Metabolic byproduct accumulation, muscle excitability and neural drive, and then muscle recruitment strategies. So just a quick look here. This is something out of a couple of really good review articles by Gerard, Mendez, and Bishop. The protocol that we're looking at here was 10 6-second sprints separated by 30 seconds rest in between each one. And as you can see, the contribution of energy systems changed significantly between the first and last, where anaerobic glycolysis is fairly dominant in the first sprint and dipping down to sometimes less than 10% in the last sprint. And then when we look at aerobic metabolism, contributing less than 10% in the first and then up to 40% in the last sprint of a protocol such as this. So what we need to include in our training when we're trying to improve repeated sprintability in athletes is going to include a number of different realms. So traditional sprint training, strength and power training, high intensity lactic power capacity training, and then high intensity aerobic power training, and then obviously specific repeated sprint training in terms of the sport. How are we going to periodize this? So something that often comes up in our industry is it depends, right? So it's going to depend on training age, if the athlete's a responder or non-responder, the nature of the sport, and then also we need to consider psychological factors here. So field-based assessments, there's many of them, usually typically involving running or a cycloergometer, and they're going to involve 5 to 6 reps of 3 to 6 second maximal efforts repeated every 30 seconds. On ice assessments, we have something called the RIAT, or the repeated high intensity endurance test. So this is a test where basically the player is going to have to skate the full length of the ice and back and repeat that effort every 30 seconds. So even some of the best skaters in the NHL, this is an effort that's going to take them roughly 12 seconds in their first rep. So the problem arises there where it's basically turning into more of an aerobic assessment than anything. One thing that we developed here at the University of Alberta is a repeated 15-meter sprint, where we're having the skater do 7 15-meter sprints repeated every 15 seconds. Something that ends up being a bit more specific to what the actual demands of the game are. So I've been meaning to kind of come up with a on-ice conditioning plan for our coaching staff for a while. And the thing that really spurred it was the implementation of injured athletes back into practice. So what often happens with the sport of hockey is you have a guy that can step back into practice, and they're probably going to throw a nice bright colored jersey on to know that they can't take contact. They might step on, shadow a player for a little bit of practice, and then they're going to have an assistant coach give them a conditioning skate at the end of practice with very little structure to it. And what we typically call in hockey is a bag skate. So there probably is a different term that they've used in the football community, but basically with this is this guy is what the coach wants to see at the end, right? Is hunched over, tired, and he's worked hard. And again, usually not a lot of structure to it. They just want to see, an all-out effort on every workbout that they're doing, and it turns up into an aerobic conditioning session. So, obviously sometimes there is a time and a place with that. And I know Rob has talked quite a bit about it on his podcast with some football cultures where they allow the coaches to kind of utilize this periodically throughout the year, where it's just more of the psychological factor to it. Just a quick excerpt from Chris Gallagher from a Free Lap USA article where it highlights the fact that this isn't only an issue in hockey, it comes up in many sports. And I won't read this out, but basically what he's saying is that oftentimes it's a time crunch with practice where they want to fit a speed session in, but it ends up just becoming a glorified conditioning session most of the time because rest periods aren't paid attention to enough. So if I'm looking at in an injured athlete scenario where they weren't going to be playing games on the weekend, this would be a reasonable schedule to follow, where we're looking at our hard days being on Monday and Wednesday, and then the easier days on Tuesday or Thursday, Friday. So just quickly going through this, basically what repeated sprint ability day, more focusing on the work to rest ratios, where you want 5 to 10 second efforts and a 1 to 2 to 1 to 3 work to rest ratio, and separating those sets by 2 to 3 minutes. Linear speed day, just straight away sprinting, but just really focusing on those rest periods of a 1 to 20 or 1 to 40 work to rest ratio. Aerobic conditioning, obviously a number of different options that you could do, but again, focusing on the duration of the work output being 20 to 40 seconds with 40 to 80 seconds of rest. And then a multi-directional speed day where the same type of duration for their efforts, but obviously putting some change of direction into the mix. Other situations, if you want to regiment and on-ice conditioning for the whole team, where you have games on the weekend, you'd always want to front load the week, being the harder days on Monday, Tuesday, easing off towards Wednesday and Thursday. And then obviously, if you had stretches of no games, whether it be a training camp situation or the holiday break, where you're taking more of the high-low approach. So high days being Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and this would be a focus on speed work. And then the same kind of concept if we wanted to focus on aerobic conditioning or anaerobic conditioning or repeated sprint ability. Those high days still staying on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, lower days on Tuesday and Thursday. Okay, so obviously super quick to get through all that, but obviously if anybody has any questions, there's my email and then my social media platforms. I'd be happy to share the actual on-ice conditioning plan that I developed with people. Yeah, just got a little picture of my little guy in there. He's already at 4 times body weight. So yeah, thank you very much.
Joe, that was brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, a couple of colleagues who are really into ice hockey, which will be really good for him. And yeah, nice to see you starting them off early. As soon as my 8-month-old can stand up, then he's getting on the weights just like your lad. So it's nice to see we're pushing the same way.
Definitely.
Cool. I'll be in touch as well because there's some really interesting things inside there as well. So thank you, Joel. But what I'm going to do now is hand straight over to Adam. You there?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yep. So, Adam, if you are ready, we can hear you loud and clear, and you should be able to share your screen now.
Yeah.
This
There we
is the test
go.
of the transitions. There we go. Cool. So full screen, and away you go, Adam.
If this works.
Yep, all working.
There we go. Awesome. Right. So, hi everyone. Hope you're all staying safe and well. I'm Adam Pulford. I'm the first team sports scientist at Rotherham United Football Club. I wanted to take this opportunity really just to showcase some of the stuff that we do here at Rotherham United and have done over the last few seasons. And I wanted to talk about how we take our research and actually apply that at the club and into our own practices. And I know with many clubs, obviously, Rotherham have to operate on a very tight budget. So I wanted to focus on some of the research we've actually been able to do cost-free. And that's just by creating and having some really good relationships with local people and organisations. And obviously, I'm very aware that it's only a 10-minute slot, so it might feel like I'm brushing over some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. But if any of you guys have any questions or want to know more, then feel free to get in touch after this, and I'd be more than happy to go through it. So firstly, I'll just start by going through a paper that our performance manager, Ross Burberry, co-authored on back in 2017, looking at the correlations between measures of fatigue and performance in a match. And I know this has been covered already today, but it showed that creatine kinase markers were significantly elevated compared to baseline. That's up to 60 hours post-match, but especially at 40 hours post-match. That obviously shows the recovery process within this time is absolutely vital, especially if the lads are being asked to play a 2 or even a 3-game week. And interestingly, when these blood markers are compared with the mechanical loading efforts through obviously GPS metrics, the study showed metrics such as accels, decels, sprints were significantly correlated, which isn't the most surprising thing considering obviously the eccentric nature of these kind of movements. And there is a lot of research that can back this up. But just to summarise, correlations between obviously match day activity variables and fatigue do show that external metrics such as total number of accels and decels and sprints do provide a really useful non-invasive indicator of subsequent fatigue status in the days following a match. So in terms of recovery, the first few days, especially up to 40 hours post-match, are obviously vital. And as a club, Rotherham United are off the day after a game, so match day +1. So we actually put a big part of the onus of the recovery process onto the players themselves. And a massive thing that's helped us do this with confidence as well has been a couple of in-house studies on the nutritional side of things. So first, we conducted an in-house study looking at sweat rate within our players using sweat patch testing. And from this, we've actually been able to take an individualised approach to hydration strategies. So the first study highlighted the sort of players that tend to be the heavy sweaters, those that lose a significant amount through sweat loss, but also those that lose a significant amount of sodium through the sweat as well. So obviously, this can affect things like dehydration, cramping, etc. So this obviously allows us to educate these players and advise various hydration strategies, such as electrolyte mixtures and more importantly, when best to take them. And further research we're actually looking at on this is how to sort of correlate the GPS metrics with this to potentially predict sweat and sodium loss from training and matches. So the next thing we were lucky enough to conduct was food intolerant testing on all the players. So this testing has allowed us to change our nutritional strategies with particular emphasis on the post-match for recovery. So obviously we want to help reduce the inflammation post-game, but we could potentially be exacerbating this with traditional supplementary foods with certain players. So again, this has just allowed us to sort of individualise the post-match recovery and educate the players themselves on how best to look after themselves. So with this, we've actually had some great anecdotal success with some of the players reporting reductions in things like eczema and gastrointestinal distress. But obviously, it's really hard to make that sort of direct link. But at the end of the day, if the player believes that this is what's helping them, then obviously it's working. But obviously, it's important to note that these could actually be quite expensive procedures to perform. But we've actually been lucky enough to do all this free of charge just through trying to think laterally and creating relationships with people and local organisations such as NTU and Larisium. So once the nutritional side of things has been taken care of, sleep is the next best recovery strategy that we can help educate the players themselves in order for them to help maximise their own recovery. So once again, just by creating and maintaining the good relationships with people, we've been able to conduct some in-house research on sleep, but specifically the behaviours that surround sleep with Sheffield Hallam, Westfield Health and the sleep geek that is James Wilson. But we initially went down the route of trying to measure sleep quantitatively through smartwatches, and we actually found that this potentially made sleep actually worse. So the players were becoming fixated on objectivity surrounding what a good night's sleep kind of looked like, and which in effect actually made them even more stressed and worried about the sleep and whether or not they were getting sort of what was needed. So that's when we sort of started to educate the players again in terms of the individualized approach to sleep and how people's sleeping situations and behaviors are completely different. So for example, we talked about obviously what are the best sleeping postures, but also little things to do to help support the posture you already sleep in. So from there, it was all about just finding out what worked for them and slowly trying to change behaviors around sleep to what was optimal to help them obviously fall asleep faster and when they were asleep, have a better quality of sleep, therefore better recovery. So all of the in-house research has obviously really helped us take an individualized approach to recovery. And this has really helped us educate the players themselves as to what is actually best for them. And we know, and to be fair, we can definitely trust that our players will be doing what they can do to help maximize their own recovery in terms of hydration, nutrition and sleep. But then it's on us to look at the physical loading that surrounds that. So how does their recent week or few weeks look running up to the game? How do their match day metrics compare to what they would normally cover in a game? And by creating the individual physical passports that we do at Rotherham, we again can sort of individualise how we as practitioners plan for the return to training. So obviously follow the following week. And if needed, then we can implement further recovery strategies. So when they actually return back into training, we can look at things like body composition, speed, strength, power, change of direction ability, alongside the load management, which can really give us a great insight into their progression and their tolerance really to the stimulus over time. So,
sorry, Adam, just on that, you've got 1 minute, if that's all right, please.
Yeah. So obviously I've got 1 minute left. So just quickly, we have a few projects we're working on in the pipeline, but we've just managed to get the goalkeeper G5 units in from Catapult. And obviously really looking forward to learning how best to use these in training games. But I'm just going to use this opportunity to reach out to you guys if there is anyone with some decent experience working with these monitors, or anyone's got any tips, then please do get in touch. So obviously I'd like to thank everyone for their time and for listening. Like I mentioned at the start, if anyone does want to go through anything in further detail, then just reach out and I'll be more than happy to answer them. So yeah, thanks for today. I appreciate that.
Cheers, Adam. Thank you. And I've used the goalkeeper units over the past 3-4 years. So happy to have a chat with you about them as well at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So drop us an email or a WhatsApp, and I'll get back in touch. Cheers for that.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
So Adam Field, can you hear us?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, fine. Do you want to share your screen now, if that's okay?
Yeah, no problem, mate. Can you see that?
Yeah, can see you now, and
All good?
hopefully you've been getting quite a lot of responses for the survey today.
Yeah, this could be the second time today that a few have heard the start of this presentation, so apologies for that mishap.
No, don't worry. Have you because your survey was one of the ones we put up, wasn't it? Have people been engaging, or have you not had a chance to look?
I've not actually had a chance to look yet, Steve. No, I'll speak to you about that afterwards.
But
Yeah,
just a reminder to all the audience, if they can please engage with the surveys and questionnaires from students and practitioners today, that'd be really helpful. So thank you. So I'll leave it over to you, Adam.
excellent. Yeah, cheers for that, Steve. And great work on putting the event together. Testament to you guys on the success that you've had and the number of people that have registered. So moving on then, I'm Adam Field, a PhD at University, and today I'll be presenting one of my my second PhD study, in fact. So in terms of extra time then, we've recently conducted a systematic review, and I just want to sort of focus on this specific area here, so recovery. Now, what we found is that this aspect of extra time had received little attention, and the studies were not comprehensive by any means. Most of them were conducted sort of following match play. So we decided that we wanted to go ahead and look at this under more controlled conditions. So firstly, we had 12 semi-professional players. And just a quick note on this, I think there's a stigma attached to semi-professional players in terms of the fitness, but this VO2 max score here kind of gives you an idea that these guys are quite well conditioned, and as such the findings are possibly applicable then to professional populations. So these players both completed both 90 minutes and 120 minutes of a treadmill-based simulation in a crossover design and balanced order. So essentially, half of them completed the 90-minute trial first, and the other half completed the 120-minute trial first, so the extra time trial, and then they switched over. Now, in terms of the recovery measures, we took these at pre-exercise, so baseline measures, immediately post-exercise, and then 24 hours, 48 and 72 hours following the simulations. In terms of the recovery variables, we used whole blood markers of creatine kinase, creatinine, urea, and aspartate aminotransferase, which are just essentially indirect markers of muscle damage and inflammation, and protein metabolism, which I'll touch on those more later on in the presentation. So we also looked at subjective assessments of perceived muscle soreness using the visual analog scale. We also looked at pain pressure threshold assessments using an algometer on the biceps femoris and rectus femoris muscles. And then in terms of the more applied measures, we assessed reactive strength index of players. So they dropped from a platform and upon ground contact jumped up into the air as high as possible. So that assessed, the transition time. And then a counter movement jump height assessment. So hands on hips, jump as high as you can. We'll squat down first of all into a sort of a 90-degree angle and jump as high as you can. And then isokinetic peak torque assessments of the eccentric knee flexors at a range of different speeds. So essentially strength assessments of the eccentric knee flexors. So as you can see here, quite a comprehensive assessment of recovery. And here is the activity block that the players took part in. So as you can see here, it's very much similar to match play. You've got sprint activity, periods of passive stationary activity, and a number of different speeds. And this, I best acknowledge my external supervisor here, Rick Page. It's not actually my protocol. It's him that validated it, so I've pinched it from him. So in terms of findings then, we found that extra time had no additional impact on any of the recovery variables except for creatine kinase. So here we have a table of both the creatine kinase and urea measures, which I'll touch on further. As you can see here, if I just bring your attention to the 24-hour mark, players following the 120-minute simulation had 53% higher creatine kinase concentrations. And again, this persisted for up to 72 hours. So there was a 58% increase, or an even bigger increase between the two trials. And in terms of the urea then, which we use as a sort of, an indirect marker of protein metabolism, protein breakdown. This was not significant, but there could perhaps be something there with this immediately post-exercise. And that was just a 10% difference there. So moving on then, just to give you more of a visual representation, pre and post the simulations, the creatine kinase responses is very similar between both trials, and then there's quite a spike then at 24 hours. This also, again, as we've said, lasted for up until the 72-hour mark. Moving on then to the urea, I've said before, it's a marker of protein breakdown, and I may be clutching at straws with this one slightly, but this finding could potentially explain previous research, and I think I've spoke about this in the discussion section of the paper that we've just written. And kind of the point I'm trying to get across here is that previous extra time research suggests that players, glucose and potentially glycogen levels are depleted during extra time, and this process, gluconeogenesis, so the creation of glucose from other products such as amino acids, could then explain why we see this increased presence of urea in the blood at this point in time. So not concrete by any means, but I think there's something there with that one. So I guess the question that we're asking is do players need extra time to recover? A bit of a play on words there. Do they need extra time to recover, and should practitioners then adapt recovery strategies following extra time matches differently to how they might then, employ recovery strategies following a 90-minute match? And I guess there's no real concrete yes or no answer with this one. But I have given a couple of sort of practical applications. Of course, these are context specific. So I listened to Chris Carlin earlier speak about the fixture congestion, and there might be a limited period between matches. So this is to be taken with a pinch of salt. But one thing is can we look to adapt our recovery approach in terms of reducing training loads, reduce training intensities? Do we have the luxuries of giving players the extra rest between matches? And then in terms of nutritional strategies, can we look to modulate carbohydrate intake prior to matches that potentially could proceed to extra time? And then certainly during matches, so there's a 5-minute window separating the 90-minute mark from the extra time period. Can we look to give players the carb gels or the sports drinks during this period? And then also, can we look to adapt protein intake following extra time matches if there is we see this protein degradation going on? So that's all from me today, Steve.
Brilliant, Adam. Thank you for that, and really insightful overview into the extra time strategy, and carrying on the research of Liam, which is great to see. So nice to see a little cameo by Richard Page in there as well.
Yeah.
So
good stuff.
Any questions for Adam, just give us a shout, and please, if you can support him and fill out his questionnaire that's up on Twitter, and it should be up on the Facebook comments as well. That'd be really good. You can stop sharing your screen now. Kieran, are you there?
Yeah, ready.
So can you share your screen now, please, if that's all right?
Yes. Yeah, one sec.
No worries. So Kieran's doing a talk looking at some binding games, assessing talent identification and
See that?
differential RPE. So yeah, we've got that now, Kieran. So you go full screen, and yeah, brilliant. I'll mute myself, and good luck with it and enjoy it. Kieran's one of my master's students, so proud that he's actually taken it upon himself to do this today. So thank you very much, Kieran, and good luck with it.
No worries, thank you. So, hello, thank you again for the opportunity to present my postgraduate research. I've never actually presented in this format before, so please just bear with me with all of it. As Steve said, my name is Kieran, and I'm currently a student at the University of Hull and Sports Science Hull City Academy. So today I'm going to be presenting the effect of biobanding and pitch size on differential ratings of perceived exertion. So we'll crack on straight away. So this picture did the rounds on Twitter quite a while ago. It's quite a famous one. So I've highlighted this, the problem. So for all you practitioners watching, this image, albeit rather extreme, may look like a normal YDP training session. Big, massive lads, little small lads. The YDP, obviously 12s to under 16s. And this can be a real problem for talent identification within academy soccer. So the previous picture leads me onto the work of Towson et al. 2018. The figure on the right shows that the greatest rate of growth occurs between the ages of 10.7 and 15.2 years. It also illustrates that the increased rate of growth or the growth spurred varies between people in terms of timing, and this therefore leads to the early and late developers, as we've seen in the picture previously. One way in order to combat this is through biobanding strategies, and biobanding is a way of categorizing players based upon growth and maturation rather than chronological age. So although research into biobanding is still in its relative infancy within academy soccer, so far it has been well received by players. There is little evidence out there for the efficacy of biobanding. However, there is a possible interaction between player maturity and game constraints, for example, relative pitch size. Moving on away from the maturation and onto the RPE side of it, RPE has in fact been advocated as a good indicator of exercise intensity. However, some have argued that it may in fact lack sensitivity when measuring different elements of team sports. And one way to sort of combat this is through DRPE. DRPE is set to increase sensitivity by discriminating between various facets. And this is something that I will discuss in a little bit more depth later on when I get into sort of the methods and what we did in our research. So the aim of our research was to investigate the effect of pitch size and maturity status on perceived exertion within youth soccer. So our participants, we used a total of 46 highly trained youth soccer players from a Category 1 and Category 2 academy from clubs currently playing within the English Football League. And the players all fit in the under 12s to under 14s age groups, so pretty much the heart of the YDP. The Kamish-Roche method was the one we used in order to estimate percentage of adult stature attained. And from this, we separated into two bands. Our band one, our early, were categorized as 90 to 95.9% of estimated adult stature attained. And our band two, our late band, were 84 to 89.9% of estimated adult stature attained. And testing was conducted over a 4-week period. And this brings me on nicely to our small-sided games. So each week we had an increasing pitch size. So the first week was our small pitch on an 8.5 meters by 8.5 meters pitch. Then the next week was medium, and then large, and then expansive. Players completed 6 games per week. Games were 4 versus 4 and 5 minutes in length. each player completed 3 bio-banded games and 3 mixed games per week. The bio-banded games were played. So basically what would happen in the bio-banded games, we'd have 2 teams per group. So as an example, if I was put into early 1, my 3 bio-banded fixtures would be against early 2, late 1 and late 2, and then obviously the same for everyone else. And then on mixed games, each team was comprised of 2 early and 2 late maturers. So although in today's presentation I'm only discussing DRPE, we did in fact use a number of different metrics, measured a number of different metrics, from Catapult M's unit, Playermaker, full-mounted IMU, and a polar heart rate belt to get a number of physiological and technical metrics. Now the DRPE, we utilised a tablet application to collect DRPE from players after each small-sided game. The image on the right, I'm just highlighting it now, I don't know if you can see, is an example of a question that each player was asked. All questions were the same, apart from the RPE facet, which is in capital letters. So after each game, the player got the tablet. Each player had their own sort of login, so to speak, their own number that coincided with their name. They got asked 4 questions. They got asked their overall RPE. They'd rate it. They then got asked their DRPE-B, which is breathlessness, DRPE-L, which is leg muscle exertion, and then DRPE-T, which was technical, tactical, cognitive. Each player gave a rating, and then that went through to a sort of cloud. We also utilised a modified version of the Omni scale to accompany the CR10. The verbal cues from the CR10, the hard, very hard, somewhat hard, moderate, maximal, easy, as you can see, we transferred across the Omni scale to give the players sort of a verbal, a pictorial cue as to what that may look like in a pictorial form. And also just to make reference to Sean McLaren's presentation earlier, we also opted for the English idiom of hard as opposed to heavy, because let's face it, if a kid's coming off a pitch playing a small-sided game, they're not going to go with that was heavy. It's going to be a hard game. It's just what we prefer, sort of language-wise. So I'm going to present a few findings now. However, these are preliminary findings. The findings that I am going to present are descriptive, as statistical analysis is still currently ongoing. So the next series of slides, I'm going to present a number of histograms for the effect of DRPE overall for the different pitch sizes. Across the x-axis, we have DRPE, and up the y-axis, we have frequency. So as you can see, the mean for RPE for the early in the small pitch size was 42, with the mean for RPE for the late developers on this same pitch size was 47, with a mean difference of 5 arbitrary units. What is kind of interesting in this pitch size is that RPE breathlessness, the mean of RPE breathlessness was in fact higher for the early developers compared to the late developers. This is something that I'll talk about at the end. The effect of medium pitch size for early developers, the mean was 42, whereas for the late developers, the mean overall RPE on the medium pitch size was 51, a difference of 9 arbitrary units. Just moving on to the large pitch size, the mean overall RPE in the large pitch size for the early developers was 38. In comparison, the mean was 47 for the late developers, again, a mean difference of 9 arbitrary units. And finally, the expansive pitch, the mean RPE for the early developers was 42 in comparison. The mean RPE for the late developers was 50. Again, a mean difference of 8 arbitrary units. So further analysis is required across all facets of the RPE. This is just descriptive overall RPE, just so we could present something of what we'd found. So based on that, the mean scores for all facets of DRP are higher in the late developing players compared to early developing as pitch size increases, apart from, as I mentioned previously, that RPE breathlessness in the small pitch size was in fact higher in the early developing players compared to late. Just quickly before I finish, it is important to remember, as I've already said, that statistical analysis of the data is not yet being conducted. So we've just got to be a bit wary with what we take from this at the minute. So just quickly, I'd just like to say thank you to all on this slide for their role and their involvement in this research. Thank you all out there for listening. And finally, a special thank you to Steve and Playermaker for putting on such a great event in less than great circumstances.
Cheers, Kieran. Thank you very much.
No worries, thank you.
Good job. I'm sure you'll go and relax a little bit now as well.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to go straight over to Jakob. Jakob, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. So thank you, Kieran.
No worries, thank you.
You can finish sharing your screen, please, Kieran.
Give it a go.
Yeah. Cool. So, Jakob, if you can start to share your screen, you should be able to take over the control.
Yes, give me a second. Yep. Right.
And it's just loading up now. Yeah, you can see your screen.
Yeah, I'll put it to full. See how it goes.
No worries. And thank you for taking the time to do this presentation as well for us.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a great day so far, and I hope that, and I think that, the evening will be just as good. And hats off for making this happen, Steve.
Thank you.
So, apologies. Sorry?
Do you want to put it full screen if you go to slideshow?
Yeah,
And,
there we go.
There you go.
Apologies for any screaming children in the background, but it's feeding time at the household, and it could sometimes be a bit rough. So,
no problems. Thank you very much. Enjoy the next 10 minutes.
Alrighty. My name is Jacob. I'm the head physiotherapist at Brøndby Masterclass, which is the academy of Brøndby Soccer Club, a Danish soccer club playing in the Super League based around Copenhagen. I'll be presenting some work I did as a part of my master's degree a couple of years ago, and I drew my poster at a poster session last year, so I thought I'd share that with you too and maybe mix it a bit up. So, the title of the study is Elite Professional Soccer Players' Experience of Injury Prevention. It's open access, published in the Cogent Medicine, so you can just Google the title and it'll pop right up. Okay, so we all know that injuries are a major problem in professional football. We know the elite UEFA Elite Club study, and we have numbers of our own, so we know that this is a problem in football. The injuries can impair the performance of the team and impair the performance and health of the individual player and the team by lowering the availability. And obviously, it has some psychosocial impairments for the individual player on its own. A lot of the injuries that we know of are pretty preventable, or at least you're able to do some interventions, some exercises in order to reduce the risk of injury. But we sometimes see that compliance with these injuries or the programs compliance can deteriorate over time, especially after a study period. Compliance tends to decrease, and after a project or something like that, compliance can decrease. And it is one of the key limiting factors of an effective injury prevention program or exercises. And we just thought that we might want to get into the heads of the players. So our research question was simply, how did the players experience injury prevention? So we took 8, this is a qualitative study, we took 8 professional soccer players in Denmark, ranging from 18 to 33 years. They've played in numerous clubs. We used Skype so we could get some of the Danish players playing abroad and larger international leagues. And we conducted 45 minutes open-ended interviews, and we analyzed it via hermeneutic phenomenology as described by Max van Manen. So basically we took all of the statements and systematically analyzed them and condensated it into 3 overreaching themes. And those 3 overreaching themes should represent all the statements from all of the players. And the 3 overreaching themes that arose was being a part of a performance environment, the need for an individual approach, and strong personal ambitions. And the first part was more the phenomenological part, where we systematically described how the players or what they were saying. And then the hermeneutics approach was started, where we more interpreted the 3 overreaching themes and the interaction between the 3 themes. And this could be interpreted within the empowerment model. An empowerment, the model proposed by Thomas and Feldhaus, is a motivational theory. It consists of 4 elements: meaningfulness, competence, impact, and choice. Meaningfulness refers to the individual's caring about the task or the individual's personal values. Competence is the belief that the individual can skillfully perform the activity. An impact reflects if the player thinks this behavior or this change in behavior will have any impact on him. And choice considers an individual's choice of initiating the exercises or the behavior and regulating it. Based on these results, we concluded that the players in the study found injury prevention interventions, whether it be exercises, load management, whatever that was done in order to prevent injuries, it was more meaningful, and they were more likely to engage in it if those 4 components of the empowerment model were present. And the practical implication of that is that we believe that the empowerment model, not just the word empowerment, but the model, may assist clinicians and researchers in creating and implementing more effective injury preventive interventions. And I'll close off by saying some of the stuff that we've been doing in Brøndby in order to engage the players, particularly in the academy, engage them more. And we feel that this is when we work with empowerment in a systematic way, not just asking the players, but asking them within those 4 elements of psychological empowerment, we feel we get under their skin and we learn a lot from the players. When using empowerment, you by definition lend or give players power, which means that you sometimes have to accept that they will tell you stuff that you do not agree with. But that is a very important part of empowering them and giving them a voice, which may nurture some of the autonomy that is very important for the development and performance. again, this I don't want to put words in other people's mouth like that, but what Sylvan and Darren talked about this morning was also getting to know your players and engaging them, and what we always talk about, players buying into something that they might not be too keen on commencing or initiating. This systematic approach to empowerment may be a very good way of checking those 4 components when you talk to players and want them to initiate or change their behavior. Thank you. And feel free to contact me on an email or Twitter or whatever might suit you, and I'm always happy to engage with people who want to discuss the matter.
Jakob, thank you. That was really good, and it was nice to see like the other side of actually speaking to the players to find out what exactly they thought of the injury risk reduction strategies, I'll call it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
If you can stop sharing your screen, and Rob, can you hear us?
Can, mate, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to start sharing your screen, please, Rob? Thank you again, Jakob.
Yeah, thank you.
There goes that on.
Okay, we can see your screen, Rob. Thank you very much. And most of the audience will be able to guess that you work at Leeds when they see some of these presentations, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So if you can just put it onto full screen, marvellous stuff. I will leave you in peace now, and good luck and enjoy.
Cheers, Steve. So yeah, firstly, thanks Steve for having me on. My presentation today will be to kind of put out some of our research that we've been collecting in collaboration with Leeds Beckett into the peak running demands of match play, with a kind of a brief overview into our practical applications of the steps that we've taken to use that. So our brief back in 2018 was to commence into the world of research in order to improve our current practice. So in collaboration with Leeds Beckett, we started to recruit 2 MRes placements a season, one with the first team and one with the academy. Our first task was to come up with a research question collectively. So that's something that the club were interested in, the first team, the academy, and Leeds Beckett themselves. So our first step in that was to review our current practice, what we were currently doing, and where we felt we could improve. Which led us to this. This is an example of an under-18 kind of GPS match report. Not too dissimilar to what you've seen before or what you may have used before. So you've got the total distance, high speed distance, sprint distance, max velocity values on the left-hand side in the white. They're obviously absolute values, and then you've got a relative value on the right-hand side in meters per minute. We felt if you looked at that a bit closer, so the 107 meters per minute is actually about 6.5 kilometers an hour, which is nothing much more than a brisk walk. So we didn't feel as though that was the best way to kind of quantify and report the player's intensity in match play or training. We have had previous managers in who have asked us to clip GPS games into 5-minute periods or 10-minute periods to kind of try quantify what the hardest periods of games were. That obviously has its limitations as well. So using that kind of segmental approach, for example, minute 3 to minute 8 may have been harder than 0 to 5 and 5 to 10, for example. So every second that goes by is the beginning of a new 5-minute period, and then add into the fact that you might want a 1-minute period, 2-minute period. There are obviously limitations with that kind of method. So the research question we came up with was this. We wanted to know what were the most demanding periods of match play. And these are the results. Now, there's a lot of data there, and these are the results that Jordan Foster and Alex Kapsis, our previous students, started, and they produced, and that's using a rolling average approach. Like I said, there's a lot of data there, but no the values on the table are values in meters per minute. So what we have is we have a value per different time frame from 10 seconds up to 10 minutes, per position and per playing squad. Having a quick look at that in a graph, again, it shows the difference between time frames, obviously from 10 seconds down to 10 minutes. There are differences between playing squads, slight differences, but they all follow the same trend. Now, if we think back to the 107 meters per minute from the GPS report, if we were then to design a drill or training or practice based on that level of intensity, we're actually under-preparing the players massively for anything really under 10 minutes. If we were doing a small side of the game or a possession, we were looking to kind of replicate 107 meters per minute. If the game was 4 minutes long, for example, we're under-preparing the players physically for what they will have to do in a game. So once we had that data, we got together and we initially highlighted 3 areas that we felt this may be able to improve our current practice. Return to play protocols, conditioning drills, but training intensity, which is where we spent most of the time, or our initial kind of time has been spent looking into that. So before we discussed possible practical applications, we wanted to adopt a multidisciplinary approach. So we wanted to include the coaches, we wanted to include the physios, but it was important to keep the player at the centre of those conversations. And this was kind of the statement that we came up with in the end. So we wanted to use the data and the research and the information to improve the execution of the technical, tactical and psychological aspects of a player's performance during the most demanding periods of the game to ensure our players are able to outperform any position. So that's almost a level up from the players working on their technical execution, their tactical understanding at low level. It's then working on those areas whilst the chaos of a game is going on. That, I have to say, you know, some of that has been inspired as well from a presentation by Richard Aikenhead by the FA, who are also doing some similar work into this topic. So practically, our objective then became, we decided we had to try simulate these most demanding periods of the match play using the data. So in order to do that, we decided to work with the coaches, and we had to manipulate the constraints of each practice in order to achieve those demands. So number of the players available, positions of where the ball starts, the duration of work to rest ratios, the distances, the type of feedback we were given and the coaches were given in live play, and also the tactical constraints that the coaches could add. We believe we can regulate this by using the data that the guys have collected, by taking the duration of practice of a possession or a game, multiplying that by the peak demand value from the table before, and then that gives us a target for the players to achieve in the drill. Now, this is a minimum target, so if we can create constraints that allow each player per position to hit their relevant target, then we have successfully simulated the most difficult period of match play. And then the learning takes place, the learning of the technical, the tactical, the psychological aspects of performance. And we have the ability to monitor that live with live GPS with the guys at Catapult. That effectively, if we take the targets out, we can, it gives us an opportunity to either adapt and modify the constraints live time. So maybe after one game, we can make it bigger, we can make it smaller. Or if we feel the constraints are suitable, it's a cue for us to encourage the players to effectively work harder or give more effort. So, future direction. So our first step, and we're working with Adam Kerr now, who's coming as our performance manager, who's doing a great job, is to integrate this process into the club's physical development framework. we want to develop a document basically outlining the optimum practice constraints per numbers available for the coach, and basically align that to the club's coaching methodology, something that can run through the club's DNA, and that the under 15s, 16s can all work along the same framework. There are some limitations with the data, and when I popped up, you might have thought of some initially. So there are areas for future study, such as distinguishing factors between playing squads. The values are quite similar from under 18 to first team now. We acknowledge, and we're not at all suggesting that the under 18s is as demanding as the first team. It's not. So we want to basically investigate further factors of what makes the first team in the championship harder than under 18s, for example. Also, to quantify the kinetic demands of each of those periods. So what actions are happening and taking place during those periods. And along with that, other GPS variables such as accelerations, decelerations, high-speed distance, sprint distance, and percentage of high-speed distance of the total target. That will help inform us to create conditioning drills, return to play protocols, because without that, just that value alone, there's not enough context to then go out and create drills. And again, from a practical aspect, we want to explore the effect that exposing players to peak demands may have upon performance or injury prevention, and then following on from that, what the minimum effective dose may be. So how long should we be exposing the players, and how often? And that's a very quick overview to some of the work we're doing. Thank you very much, Steve, for having me on. I couldn't finish without acknowledging some people who have helped along the way. This is by no means my research study at all. I'm just a spokesperson. So Stacey Emmons, Dan Weaven, who have supervised the students from a Leeds Beckett point of view, Tom Robinson and George Bell, who've helped myself supervise the students at the club, and then Jordan and Alex are students from last year, and obviously there's Song and Josh Snowden, who are continuing the brilliant work that the guys have started. So, big shout out to those four, because they've done and doing a great job. And again, if anybody's got any more questions who would like to discuss more on the practical applications of it, then those are my contact details. I'd love to discuss anything further.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Really insightful stuff into the peak demands. I know, as you said, it's nice to see you're trying to challenge the players and keep them pushing towards beyond those kind of peak demands as well at the games as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. So